Well, thanks for staying with us. You're watching WION World is One. My name is Mohammed Saleh, and if you're just joining us, there's been complete pandemonium on the streets of Sri Lanka where the protesters have stormed into the presidential palace. And according to reports that have come in, the Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has fled from his presidential palace. And this is, of course, what is unfolding on the streets of Sri Lanka, and also in terms of what's been happening after the protesters decided to storm inside the presidential secretariat. So this is what the scene looks like inside the presidential secretariat after the protesters stormed inside the presidential secretariat that was very heavily, that had a lot of police presence, that was very heavily guarded. But despite of that, thousands of protesters who had surrounded the presidential secretariat forced their way in, and this is what the scene looks like, where hundreds of angry protesters have barged in. They forced the president Gotabaya Rajapaksa to flee, and in these videos the protesters can in fact be seen inside of the bedrooms used in the presidential secretariat. The protests in Sri Lanka have clearly spiraled out of control. Many protesters who stormed inside the secretariat were even seen enjoying in the swimming pool there. Unprecedented scenes from the presidential secretariat. The president has, of course, fled from the presidential palace. So unprecedented scenes playing out inside of the presidential secretariat. This is, of course, one of the small swimming pools inside of the presidential secretariat that has now been used by the protesters who barged inside of the secretariat by driving the security guards out. Now remember, what's been unfolding on the streets of Sri Lanka is in many ways the anger of the people that's being expressed because of the acute shortage, the chronic shortage of food, fuel and other essential supplies. The simple fact is, because of the government's lack of financial management, Sri Lanka has run out of its foreign exchange reserves. Without the dollar, Sri Lanka is unable to purchase any food or any fuel. It has resorted to rationing of food and fuel. Fuel is not sold to everyone. There are restrictions on the amount of food that can also be purchased. And this is what has made the people extremely angry. And these are some unruly scenes from inside of the presidential secretariat after the protesters barged inside, and complete pandemonium and a breakdown of the government's order, where the protesters have now virtually taken over the presidential secretariat and the streets of Sri Lanka. So this is the situation that is presently unfolding, but it's not something that the government could not have foreseen is what would happen, because remember, Sri Lanka has been witnessing protests for a very long time now, and despite the fact that the government had been trying its best to address the crisis, it simply had not been able to address So these are the scenes of the thousands of protesters who had surrounded the presidential secretariat early this morning. You can look at the crowd that had completely surrounded the presidential secretariat. The armed security guards at that time were completely powerless in taking on the thousands of people who were demanding for answers and who were demanding for accountability from their government. The president, of course, fled from the presidential palace. And according to reports that we've got, he's been taken to some place, an undisclosed area, where he's being kept safely by the military. But the people have now taken over the streets in Sri Lanka, These are the scenes from in front of the presidential secretariat in Colombo, and thousands of people are out on the streets. They've taken over the presidential secretariat. Ranil Wickremesinghe, who remember had been brought in just a few days back as the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, has been making some desperate statements. He's convened the cabinet and he's also expected to shortly put out a statement. But what can now be said by the political leaders when people seem to have completely lost faith in the government? Now, for several months, the protesters had been demanding that Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the strongman president of Sri Lanka, had to go. The slogan of these protests was Gota, go home. But despite of that, Gotabaya Rajapaksa decided to dig his heels and stay on. But right now, according to in the manner in which things are unfolding, Gotabaya Rajapaksa is in hiding. He was forced to flee from the presidential palace. He's presently being kept in an undisclosed location by the army. The protesters have gone completely berserk. This complete pandemonium on the streets of Sri Lanka, and it's an extremely difficult situation which the authorities there will have to confront with and resolve, because what is going to unfold in the next few hours is something that needs to be seen, because things can clearly spiral way out of control even from here. And also my colleague Dasani Athawda is on the streets of Colombo. She's been tracking the story very closely for us, and she sent us this update in terms of what's been happening there. Dasani, take over.
Protesters still continue to march towards the presidential secretariat, which is only a few hundred meters away from this specific location. While the sporadic tear gas firing has stopped, 31 individuals have so far sustained injuries at this mass rally, which is set to continue throughout the day today. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe has now requested for the Parliament to immediately convene, with other MPs in Parliament now calling for President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to immediately step down from his position as President. Stay with WION World is One as we bring you the very latest as and when it happens here in Colombo. Reporting for WION, I am Dasani Athawda.
All right, so that was my colleague Dasani Athawda there reporting from the streets of Colombo as the crowd has now completely gone berserk. And many of these monks who've sided with the people, remember the monks of course play a pretty important role politically in Sri Lanka. They are also out in the streets. They're demanding Gotabaya Rajapaksa to in fact step down. The entire political crisis is sparked because of the economic crisis. The economic crisis has happened because of several factors. Key among them is the complete economic mismanagement by the Rajapaksa brothers. Mahinda Rajapaksa, who was the Prime Minister, was driven out on the 9th of May. His home was in fact burned down. And similar things, it appears, are happening with Gotabaya Rajapaksa as well. The protesters stormed into the presidential palace and Gotabaya Rajapaksa had to flee from the presidential palace. And this is, of course, an extremely difficult situation that is unfolding in Sri Lanka. And I'm told that my colleague Dasani Athawda, who's been tracking the developments closely, is live with us. She's joining us over the phone line. Dasani, these are unprecedented scenes that are being witnessed on the streets of Sri Lanka. The president, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, we're given to understand, has fled from the presidential palace. Do we at this point of time know as to where Gotabaya Rajapaksa is, and is he now, at least now, willing to step down?
Well, yes, as you rightfully pointed out, both the presidential secretariat along with the official residence of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa was infiltrated hours ago, with hundreds, if not even thousands of protesters now entering these premises. However, what is interesting right now is that we are receiving multiple breaking news alerts noting that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has informed Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe that he is ready to accept any decision that is put forward following an emergency all-party meeting that is scheduled to get underway shortly at 4 p.m. here in Sri Lankan time. Nevertheless, with regard to the mass protests that are currently happening, protesters still continue to come to the main protest site, quite literally in their thousands. And keep in mind, Sri Lanka is currently facing an acute shortage of fuel. And disregarding all of these shortages, these people continue to walk by foot and on foot towards the presidential secretariat. The accurate location of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa is yet to be known because it is confirmed that he is not at his official residence nor at the presidential secretariat. But what is interesting to see is that the next few hours here in Sri Lanka will change the course of politics for sure, given that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has now clearly mentioned to the Prime Minister that he is ready to accept any decision that is to be put forward by the all-party leaders meeting. Nevertheless, it is also worthwhile to note that the opposition leader, Wickremesinghe, is currently in hospital or was hospitalized a few hours ago as well. We do not know why he has fallen ill, and he has now clearly mentioned that his party, which is also the main opposition party of Sri Lanka, the Samagi Janabalavegia, will not be taking part at this all-party leaders meeting, which is scheduled to take place at 4 p.m. today.
Absolutely indeed, because that is a big development, because there Gotabaya Rajapaksa is virtually now conceding that he will accept any decision that will be taken at the all-party meeting. Now, the question that a lot of people would, of course, want to ask is, Ranil Wickremesinghe is, of course, convened for this meeting. He's convened for an urgent meeting of the cabinet, and he said that he would like to address the problems that people in Sri Lanka have been facing. But the fact is, Ranil Wickremesinghe was brought in to address these problems, but nothing has actually been addressed. The chronic crisis in terms of the shortage of fuel, in terms of food, has continued because Sri Lanka has run out of its foreign exchange reserves. And unless something is done on that front, what can the political leaders now announce for the people of Sri Lanka that would in some ways, tone down the anger that the people are experiencing?
So sorry, given that for months on end, the message has been quite clear from the people of Sri Lanka. Their frustrations only piled up over the months with fuel shortages, power cuts, inflation, and so on. And they, in unison, the entire island is taken to the streets and has come in their thousands with one message, and that is for President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to step down and that they've simply had enough of this government, which has been led by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. So I think, if at all, the major message that the entire nation is eagerly waiting to hear and is waiting to sort of be given out by local media outlets here is that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa will be conceding to the voice of the people. Now, this is what the people are really waiting for, and like I said, this development of the president's intention to sort of agree to any decision that is made by the party leaders is what the entire nation is sort of looking for right now. And obviously the decision of the party leaders meeting, which we will receive in another 1.5 to 2 hours, will be absolutely crucial for the governance of Sri Lanka, along with its future course for its economic crisis as well.
Absolutely indeed. The next task will be very crucial. It's 3:44 p.m. in Sri Lanka right now. In another 15-16 minutes is when that all-party meeting is, of course, expected to convene. Dasani, the question that I want to ask you is, we are looking, as we speak with you, the unruly images of the mob that stormed inside the presidential secretariat and also into the presidential official residence of the president. Now, is this a protest that is being led by the opposition, or is this some kind of a leaderless protest? Who is fueling these protests in Sri Lanka? Is it just the people who are out there, or is it the opposition that's also stoking the fires brought about because of the acute shortage of food and fuel?
Absolutely. Now, for the course of the past 2.5 months, there have been multiple protests for days on end. But we have to keep in mind that the main protest site, which began outside the presidential secretariat, is purely a people's protest. And what is happening today, what is unfolding right now here in Colombo since morning, is purely a citizens-led protest where campaigning is just done through social media and even word of mouth, where we did see in the early hours of the morning people lending out their vehicles, their lorries, their buses, or even instances where trains were bought by people so that all the tickets of the train were bought so people could just, get on that train and come to this exact protest site from the outskirts of Colombo as well. So this protest is largely, it's not entirely been a people's protest, because at the end of the day, it is the common citizen who is voicing their anger and their frustration. And as of right now, we did also certain reports of MPs who tried to join these protests, who are then sent back and even attacked on several occasions, because the people's frustration is not with the people itself, but rather the 225 electors plus the president for leading this country into this situation right now. So this is purely a people's protest. And like I said, it will be interesting to sort of track and see the mood and the tone of the people in the next few hours, depending on what decision will come our way for the party.
Absolutely, indeed. That is very crucial, you know, in terms of how this protest is being led, who are the people who are behind this protest. But as you mentioned, this appears to be a people's-led protest that is being driven purely by the shortages of food and fuel and other basic essential supplies. But scenes of complete pandemonium that played out earlier this morning. This, of course, is the presidential secretariat. Thousands of people who had surrounded the presidential secretariat earlier this morning. Despite the heavy security presence, they managed to force their way into the presidential secretariat. The president, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, of course, has fled from his official residence, the presidential palace, and his whereabouts are not known. We are given to understand, according to reports that have come in, that he is presently being escorted away by the army and is being kept safe. But the unruly mob that's now taken over the secretariat, this is what the scene looks like, where people have stormed inside of the presidential secretariat, and this is unprecedented in some ways. This is the worst economic crisis that Sri Lanka has been dealing with since its independence, and things are only getting worse. And also there are several videos that are being circulated on social media about Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who's in fact fled from the presidential palace. And this is one of the videos that's now doing the rounds on social media, which allegedly shows the luggage belonging to the president being hurriedly packed into a naval ship, the SLNS Gajabahu. And this is, of course, a video from the Colombo port, whereas the whereabouts of the president at this point of time are still unknown. Bags and big suitcases are being taken into this ship. And according to the latest statement from the Prime Minister's office, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has told Prime Minister Wickremesinghe that he will respect any decision that is taken at the all-party meeting that is expected to convene in another 10-12 minutes from now. And it remains to be seen as to what will be the future of Sri Lanka, because remember, these protests will in a very fundamental way change the manner in which Sri Lanka will be governed over the coming months and perhaps years. But Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the man who had decided to dig his feet in, who had said that he will not resign, has now said that the decision is now with the all-party meeting and he will abide by any decision that is taken. Because at this point of time, in terms of how the manner in which the crowd has behaved, it is simply untenable for Gotabaya Rajapaksa to continue as the president of the Sri Lankan nation. And my colleague Dasani Yathavda is still with us on the phone line. Dasani, these are unprecedented scenes that are playing out on the streets and also inside the presidential secretariat. Now, this is something that not many people would have thought would happen, because the anger of the people of Sri Lanka is such that they've now taken over the presidential palace. I'm told that my colleague Dasani Yathavda is no longer with us, but we'll try reconnect with her. But this is a pivotal moment in the governance of Sri Lanka. This is a crisis, a political crisis that's been sparked by inflation, that's been sparked by food shortages, that's been sparked by fuel rationing. And it is difficult to foresee as to how Sri Lanka will be able to overcome this particular crisis. Fundamentally, what has happened is that Sri Lanka has run out of its funds. Fundamentally, Sri Lanka has not got the foreign exchange reserves, the dollars that it needs to purchase fuel and food from the international market. The last few months, it had been relying on aid from certain friendly nations such as India and a few other nations who had given out the lines of credit, but even these are not sufficient to address the scale of the crisis, the debt crisis, and also the lack of foreign exchange reserves that Sri Lanka finds itself with. Now, these are videos from inside of the presidential secretariat. Some very unfortunate scenes there. The people have completely taken over the presidential palace and the presidential secretariat. This is the anger of the people that is being expressed. The security forces who were stationed in big numbers, simply could do nothing in front of the thousands of people who had gathered and surrounded the presidential palace. This, according to reports, is a completely a people's-driven movement. The opposition, although not completely backing the government, because remember, at this point of time, there was talk about unity in terms of how the country would, of course, be led within the political faction. But the people seem to have lost complete confidence in the political class that had been ruling Sri Lanka. Very crucial hours, the next couple of hours, because the cabinet all-party meeting will be convened. It is expected to start at about 4 p.m. local time in Sri Lanka, which is another 7-8 minutes more. And it remains to be seen as to what will be the statement that will be put out once the cabinet meeting, of course, convenes. And it needs to be seen as to whether Gotabaya Rajapaksa, one of the first things is the fact that will he now be asked to step down? Is that the decision which the cabinet will take? Is something that needs to be seen. But these are scenes from a naval ship into which Gotabaya Rajapaksa is said to have been taken into safety. You can see the suitcases that are being loaded. This is said to be the luggage that Gotabaya Rajapaksa is said to be taking with him. No one at this point of time knows what is in those suitcases that Gotabaya Rajapaksa decided to carry out with him when he fled from the presidential palace. But this is the big headline of the moment. The people in Sri Lanka angry because of the poor governance, angry because of the lack of food and medicines and fuel, and angry because the government has completely run out of money because of its poor mismanagement of affairs. They've stormed the presidential palace, and the president has, of course, fled from the country. And I also earlier spoke with Dr. Aruna Kulatunga, who joined me live from Colombo, and this, of course, is what he's had to say on the crisis that is unfolding in Sri Lanka.
I hope it will be soon, but there's a problem with this whole thing. This is a constitutional situation that is there. What if happen? What is next? He can give up, and what happens next? That is an issue that not just himself, but the rest of the cabinet and the prime minister is going to consider in the next few hours. There's a meeting that has been called, all-party meeting that has been called, and that question will be taken up at this point of time. I have to say he has to go. There's no question about it. But how do we do that? What are the constitutional way of doing that? It has been debated many weeks now, but there's no clear answer to that. This is my personal opinion. I believe he doesn't want to hand over the presidency to the next person who's in line, and that is Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. And there's a lot of pressure coming from his party not to do that, I believe. But more than that, I think he has a sense of, I started this, I got to finish this, I'm a military man, I just can't leave like this. That sense is also there. However, I think he's now at a point, the tipping point arrived today. I understand that he has been very seriously told by his colleagues, his friends, it's time to go. It's very difficult to change disasters such as this in 2 months. So basically what Ranil Wickremesinghe has done is to rebuild the confidence, especially amongst the international community that has been working with us over a period of time, especially the debtors. Unfortunately, there was the death of or the killing of Prime Minister Abe in Japan is going to set us back quite badly, because he was one of the people that Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe was in touch with and having a dialogue with in terms of getting the money coming back to Sri Lanka. Now, having said that, it's something that is not easy to do within 2 months, especially when the government machinery is not working. We don't have fuel. It's so many crises at the same time. So you got to handle it one at a time.
Well, that's all the time we have in this edition of the News Bulletin, but we'll of course continue tracking this big developing story that is unfolding in Sri Lanka, the island nation that is in complete crisis. The president, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, has of course fled from his official residence. The whereabouts of the president are not known, but we expect the cabinet meeting to convene in just a few moments from now. And the decisions that will be taken in that cabinet meeting will, of course, have a lot of effect in terms of what happens to the Sri Lankan politics for many weeks and months to come. We'll slip into a short break. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.